Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong. And this is a podcast where I look at the Facebook memes of somebody I used to know back in my younger days, and I debunk his right wing bullcrap. And I call him Mr. K because I keep him relatively anonymous, but his last name really does start with the letter K. And this time, I've got to admit that this meme is actually a little bit on the funny side. It's not the worst thing he has posted, and there is a possible laugh you could get out of it. And even the sentiment is not totally 1,000% wrong or whatever, although it is still incorrect when you actually get down to it. So, what is the right wing meme here that I'm talking about? Well, it shows a cartoon with Bernie Sanders' head on Scrooge McDuck's body, and he's skiing down a massive pile of gold and dollar bills in his money vault. And he's accompanied by his little duck nephews, or his duckling nephews, I suppose I could say. And the caption reads, Bernie Sanders leaving his third lakefront property to go speak about the evils of wealth and capitalism. So, like I said, it is a little bit of a funny meme. So, I guess I can give a little credit where it's due. It's not the most disgusting thing that Mr. K has ever posted, yet it's still wrong ultimately. Let me explain why. So the meme relies on a common rhetorical tactic, equating any personal wealth or property ownership with hypocrisy if someone criticizes economic inequality or certain aspects of capitalism, or let's face it, certain aspects of conservatism or right wing ideology in general. You know, if you're not completely in the poorhouse, if you're not basically homeless, they'll be like, oh, you can't criticize the capitalist system, which is a little bit funny because actually, one of my favorite anarchists in the history of the world was actually Kropotkin, who was born a Russian prince, and he basically abandoned that luxury, that life of ease, to become a revolutionary uh, anarchist philosopher and activist. So, one of my favorite political figures of all time is a class traitor. And going back to the meme, the argument sounds intuitive on the surface, but it doesn't hold up well under scrutiny. And first off, Bernie Sanders does not advocate universal poverty. So, just to be clear about that, the meme assumes that because Bernie Sanders owns multiple properties and he has become relatively wealthy, he cannot criticize wealth inequality. However, Sanders has never argued that people should be poor or that nobody should own property. His political positions generally focus on reducing economic inequality, increasing taxes on the wealthiest Americans, expanding social programs, strengthening labor unions, and limiting the political influence of billionaires and large corporations. He's not saying, he's not even saying, like, you can't be a millionaire. In fact, I remember reading somewhere that even if a person has like $2 million, that no longer qualifies you as being particularly well off. And I believe it with the inflation rate and the mere fact that a lot of things could just totally wipe you out quickly. It seems accurate to say that even if you are someone who has a couple $1 million, you're actually not that well off. And there is a significant difference between saying wealth should be distributed more evenly and more fairly and saying nobody should be allowed to become wealthy at all. And three homes sounds more dramatic than it is. I'm just going to say it like that. Now, and importantly, I don't recall Bernie Sanders ever saying that a person should not be able to own a home or even more than one home. If you can find a clip of that, then okay, send it my way. I'd love to see it. But the third lakefront property line is designed to sound extravagant. The three properties commonly referenced are a home in Vermont that serves as his primary residence, a townhouse in Washington, D.C., used while serving in Congress, and a vacation property on a lake in Vermont, purchased after his wife inherited money from the sale of family property. So, many members of Congress maintain residences in both their home state and Washington because their jobs require them to spend time in both locations. And in fact, for the record, if anybody out there, you have more than one home, you've got like a vacation home, I don't necessarily hate your guts for it. All right? Just for the record, I don't think you're necessarily a villain just because you have more than one place that you live or can spend time at. But the lake house is certainly a luxury compared with what many Americans can afford, but it is far removed from the kind of wealth that Sanders typically criticizes because guess what? Millionaire is not the same as billionaire. Much of Sanders' criticism has focused on billionaires with a B. So, an important distinction, actually. A millionaire and a billionaire occupy vastly different economic positions. And to illustrate that, you can even look a little bit at the math. Now, I've never been the biggest math person, guilty as charged. I don't spend a lot of time monkeying around with numbers, but from what I understand, $1 million equals $1 million, and $1 billion is basically $1,000 million. So that's already a significant difference, and someone worth $3 million is far closer financially to an average middle class household than to a billionaire worth $10 billion, for example. And Sanders' net worth comes largely from book sales following his presidential campaigns, not from ownership of major corporations, hedge funds, or inherited fortunes. And also, an important thing to note, I doubt he would totally oppose his properties being taxed or anything like that. If you could find an example of him fighting the the ability to tax any of those properties, go ahead and let me know. I'd be interested in hearing about that as well. That would make the meme a little bit more accurate right off the bat. So, criticizing capitalism does not require opting out of society or even out of capitalism itself, right? You can see problems with something in society and still be a part of that society. Another assumption behind the meme is if you criticize capitalism, you shouldn't participate in it. Yuck, yuck. It's really kind of a goofy thing to say because obviously one of the reasons you would criticize something is precisely because you participate in it and you have criticisms of it because of your experiences with it. The idea that you can't criticize something that you kind of participate in, that is a logical fallacy. People can criticize systems they live within while still participating in them. So by that logic, let's look at the flaws in the logic that that you can't criticize something unless you're totally outside of it. Well, that would mean that someone cannot criticize pollution if they drive a car, or hell, if you even pay taxes, because tax money goes to the military, and the US military is actually the biggest polluter, from what I understand. So, you can't drive a car, you can't you, you can pay taxes to the military and all that kind of stuff. So I suppose you can't have a job, you can't buy products because sometimes products involve the creation of pollution. Well, it seems like a lot of the time they do, maybe all the time, and etc. etc. You wouldn't be able to do anything if you are concerned about pollution, basically. And according to that logic, you also could not criticize healthcare costs if they use hospitals. I mean, think about that. Like, if you if you benefit from the use of a hospital, well, how dare you criticize that hospital, or how dare you be concerned about medical malpractice or something like that? You should just attend to your own wounds or whatever. Seek home remedies, folk remedies, instead of relying on modern medicine. And you know that reminds me of these people who are skeptical of all Western medicine. Like, I once encountered somebody like that, and I was like, well, I'm pretty sure it's not all bad. You can probably rely on some Western medicine. Just because it's from the West probably doesn't mean it's all bad. Because for one thing, not every medical innovation or technique or technology that is used in Western medicine necessarily even had origins in Western medicine. It just might have been augmented by certain approaches over here over the years. I mean, things are complicated. It's like if you look at the history of certain fruits and vegetables, and you learn that, oh, certain vegetables and fruits and spices and these things have origin stories that are complicated. They come from different parts of the world, and so on and so forth. Knowledge is like that as well. And what about, saying that someone cannot criticize government policy if they pay taxes? Like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, that should actually give you more reason to criticize government policy in general, because you're actually paying into it. That should give you a little extra incentive to say, hey, my tax dollars are not being used in the right way. So, participating in a system does not prevent someone from arguing that the system should be reformed, or in some cases, maybe even actually fully abolished. You know? So, the Scrooge McDuck imagery is also deliberately misleading if you think about it. The cartoon, it depicts Sanders swimming in mountains of cash like the fictional character Scrooge McDuck. And the implication is that Sanders possesses enormous wealth, when in reality, Bernie Sanders, I was going to call him Barry Sanders, Bernie Sanders is affluent by ordinary standards, like he's better off than I am, for example, but nowhere near the level of wealth associated with the ultra rich, the individuals that he frequently criticizes. So the image exaggerates his financial status to make a political point rather than accurately portray his his views or even his wealth level. So on the surface, you could say the meme might get a few things semi correct. A fair criticism is that Sanders has personally benefited from the economic system that he criticizes, and it is reasonable to an extent to ask whether his lifestyle aligns with his rhetoric, and whether his policy proposals would affect people in his income bracket or people below his income bracket. Those are all entry level concerns. But this meme, it just does not withstand scrutiny, and those types of concerns, as far as I'm concerned, Bernie Sanders, he has met that challenge. He has addressed all of those sorts of issues, or at least most of them, by just being a fighter for the working class and the poor and all that kind of stuff. So, yes, you could say that to a small degree he is actually a class traitor. Um, but in some ways, I kind of like that, actually. So, I like to know that there are some people out there. I guess even if you are a billionaire, even though I might question how you got that money, that extreme level of wealth, but if you are a billionaire who actually does believe in giving your money back and actually helping out the working class and all that kind of stuff, well, you have an opportunity to prove your value to somebody like me by being an actual progressive and standing with the working class, and maybe giving more of your wealth back to those who need it more than you do. Maybe you don't need that yacht or that mega mansion or mega yacht, I should say. Maybe you don't need that second or third private jet. I don't know. And, these are all legitimate political questions. And while the meme does not establish that Sanders is a hypocrite simply because he owns property, he earned money from best selling books, he became a millionaire and all that. So the meme fails. And to prove hypocrisy, one would need to show that he advocates rules for others that he refuses to follow himself, not merely that he has achieved some level of financial success, even if it's a level that most people actually do not have. So the meme conflates wealth with extreme wealth, exaggerates Sanders' financial position through this cartoon imagery, and misrepresents his actual political arguments about inequality and economic power. And of course, Bernie Sanders is a big boy. He's able to defend himself. I understand that. But I just wanted to address this silly little meme